Obviously, a very heavy and very heartbreaking subject, to Eric's point, right after Father's Day. I can't imagine your father, your son coming home in basically a coma, a vegetative state, and then a week later.
I was hearing what Eric was saying, and I was thinking about my kids, and essentially this is how I look at it. A man was given a death sentence for stealing a poster. That's it. They can say, well, he got sick. It's under your watch, folks. He got a death sentence.
And the thing is, they gave him 15 years of hard labor for stealing a poster out of a hotel lobby. This is insane. So we hear this. We hear these human rights violations against his own people, Kim Jong-un. But then we hear about other people that they're holding in captivity. Again, honestly, it's time now. It's time that the Chinese have said that they're going to go ahead and jump on board and help us out in this. They even said they may even institute some sanctions on North Korea. But we got to hold them accountable to this now. We need to say, if you're not going to do it, we're going to do it with you, China.
Yeah, they absolutely do. And we should give credit where credit is due, because the Trump administration worked doggedly to bring him home at least before he passed and his parents were able to see him. That did not happen under the Obama administration, and his father has raised that issue. So part of what we need to deal with is how we deal with these administrations and these corrupt governments who are holding our people, and how we get them home. And to your point, we absolutely do need to do something in terms of retaliation on this. And the question is what? And I think that's what we're going to wait.
Well, I mean, we don't want to start any, nuclear war. We know they have nuclear weapons, but we can certainly start with the leaning on China. In other words, making sure that China does, in fact, look, almost somewhere around 90% of the food that goes into North Korea comes from China. Trade some of the 85% of the oil or the energy that North Korea consumes comes from China.
Absolutely.
It's time to put a stop. And if they don't want to do it, put a stop to the banks that do business. The Chinese banks don't want a sanction from the U.S. They don't want that at any cost.
Right, absolutely. Our own sanctions really, honestly, won't do much. It has to come from China. Absolutely has to. Really, really does. And this is just something, it's so sickening. I'm just so sad thinking about this happening. They'll probably be excited for him to come home, and it's just sick. Sick. Can
I say one thing? I don't hold my breath that they're going to change. I don't.
No.
We should work to make that happen. But right away, there's some kids maybe thinking about going over there. I don't know his backstory. I don't know why he was there, and I'm certainly not going to blame the victim. But anyone thinking of going over there for any reason, I think should think twice.
I want to bring this point up. Eric, you have been a champion around China, getting on board with this thing in a real way. And, I kind of can speculate, well, why is there, what's the incentive going to be for China? I think now, in the case of this young man losing his life for a poster, let us not forget what is happening here. We've got to, as a nation, make them get on board. This is not another one of these scenarios where their financial interests can outweigh anything here.
They have two.
It's got to be so important.
China has two. We have two buttons we can push with China. Number one is the financial. Like I said before, there are ways to we can apply they're harsh sanctions. The Chinese banks need that income. They need to continue to turn over their yuan in others to do global business. Right now, they're growing at something like 4 or 5%. They need that in order to continue their growth, just to sustain themselves. That's a big thing. If they don't like that, there is the threat of, if there were any sort of military action on the Korean Peninsula, specifically in North Korea, do you know there would be literally 5-10 million refugees flooding directly into China? They would be devastated. It would be devastating for China. And guess what? No one else is going to help them out. We're not going to take millions of North Korean refugees. South Korea, what we should do is put up the freaking wall around the North-South Korea and say, oh, no, the refugees aren't coming to South Korea. This guy's been threatening South Korea for the better part of 40 or 50 years. You're going to go north to China. That may change their mind a little.
Yeah, I want to ask you, Dr. Jeannie, certainly if China wanted to, they could be incredibly helpful around this situation with North Korea. What is it going to take for them to want to, or at least be incentivized to?
It's going to take pressure on the part of the administration, and that's what I think we're really looking for. And the question here is the death of this young man going to be enough for the U.S. government to push China? Because they certainly aren't going to step up to it on their own, and it's going to have to we're going to have to use some financial pressure, some economic pressure. I don't think we should use military pressure, but we are going to have to work with them to say enough is enough. You cannot have young people going over and dying for these reasons. And one other thing, somebody needs to look at the tour group that let this young man and this group into North Korea. Because to your point, you really can't go where the State Department tells you not to go. And that's what happened in this case. There were warnings all over the place not to go.
Yeah, and we saw Dennis Rodman going to North Korea last week as well, and many of us scratching our heads like, why in the world, are you going over here when we know what the situation is? This is a man who is starving his own people. He's absolutely deranged and crazed. In what circumstance does that even make sense?
We're talking about Dennis Rodman or the leader?
Oh, well,
right, exactly.
Sorry.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
I agree. I don't get the concept. We go over there thinking that we have these cherished freedoms that we love here in the United States, but you're one step away from finding yourself stripped of your liberty and perhaps dead if you go over there. I'm just saying.
Think about this for 1 second. Right now, the North Koreans keep testing these intercontinental ballistic missiles. If they do go ahead and figure out a way to put a warhead on top of one of their longest range missile, 30 minutes is the lead time between firing that missile in North Korea and Los Angeles. Now, are you willing to risk Los Angeles? Or do you, I don't know, Kat, look, you and I are on the same page on a lot of these things when the U.S. isn't directly affected, but now the U.S. is being directly affected by this North Korean crazy dictator. It may be time for a preemptive strike.
I don't think so. I think that military action should be avoided at all costs. I think we should at least, before we do that, try to put pressure on China, try to handle it absolutely every single other way, because then that's just a guaranteed disaster if we do that. I mean, we could do that, we could get them, but it's not like that they wouldn't come back.
The Israelis took out the Iranian nuclear setup in the 80s. They said, this is getting very dangerous for the Middle East, certainly the Iranians, and they preemptively went to a preemptive strike on the Iranians and wiped out their nuclear program, at least set them back 20 or 30 years. Why couldn't we do it? It's not a bad idea to start thinking about doing that with North Koreans.
I'm going to ask you this, Eric, and I'm not suggesting this good faith question here. There's such thing as pressure on China, and then there's an ultimatum with China. Is that on the table from your perspective? I know it sounds.
Again, it's not China. China can help, but it's not China who's our enemy.
No, it's not. But to Kat's point, maybe they're better positioned to be more effective, short of military action.
And as horrible as this is a child of a family. It's one incident. And so the White House's position may be, look, we've got, in terms of priority.
I think that's dangerous, Mark.
They're testing an intercontinental ballistic missile that can reach Los Angeles technically in 30 minutes.
I understand.
It's just the grace of God that we've been able to successfully put something up that intercepts that.
But you just suggested you start going down a certain road.
Well, I asked the question, right?
Right. Well, you start going down a road, be prepared to keep going.
Well, what's
you
the road?
understand?
I mean, you can do what the Israelis did in the 80s and say, you know what? We're going to go ahead and just wipe you out and give you 20 more years or 30 more years before you're going to ever be able to deliver a nuclear warhead to the United States. What are they going to do? To fight back? I mean, you certainly would need China to get on board and say, we're not going to fight you either. This is your thing with the North Koreans. Japanese are on our side. South Koreans are on our side.
We have a lot of friends.
That would not be a bad idea if China says to North Korea, you want to play with the United States this way? You can. We're not going to defend you anymore.
And I guess my question is, if not now, I hear what you're saying about the list of priorities, Mark, and I can appreciate where you're coming from.
That's not my position.
No.
That's the White House's position. We start here.
Sure.
We got one. That's how they think.
But sometimes I think one is enough. Honestly, frankly, and for me, if this kind of instance, under these circumstances, isn't enough to call to action a completely unanimous response on this, I don't know what it would take.
Well, the ballistic missile issue is a reason to consider it. I don't support it. I happen to agree with Kat on that one. I do not support that, and I can imagine the president would, given all that he said in terms of isolationism during the campaign. I do not think the loss, the unfortunate, really unfortunate loss of this child is enough to start that kind of military effort.
So what do you wait, Jeannie? What do you do? You wait till a missile's on its way to Los Angeles and hope, as Ebony points out, that missile interceptor works, and if it doesn't, you sacrifice Los Angeles to say, you know what, we waited, we shouldn't have waited. Or do you go ahead and say, there is going to be, and by the way, if you do this with what I just suggested, if you do a preemptive strike to wipe out their missile, or their nuclear program, or at least put it back several decades, you will have a lot of innocent people who will die. The casualties of war will be massive. Thousands, tens of thousands will die.
You're not talking in the abstract.
That's the problem.
Eric, are you advocating right now, if you were in charge, you'd say, let's go, let's wipe them out,
here's what I've said in the past. I said this Kim Jong-un continues to test these missiles that put more and more danger to our West Coast.
I'm with you.
I think
solution?
I think the next time you test another missile,
I'm always going to be against. I'm always going to be very wary of killing innocent civilians, large numbers of innocent civilians. I really certainly
are
am.
Citizens. They will be victims as well.
100%. But there's nothing in the Constitution that allows for preemptive war.
And there are things between going to war and we could negotiate, we could pressure, we can try to defend ourselves.
We've had 5 presidents try and fix the North Korean.
It's a huge problem, I grant you.
We do have to go, and certainly we could be here all day, but I want to say the question is, what are we waiting for from